Okay, this will be part 7 of how to pass your check ride in an R44. And this section is going to cover cross-country flight planning, VFR cross-country flight planning. And one of the first things you want to do is when you're getting ready to go do your check ride is you need to be sure that the DPE that you're going to be using, you need to check with them and find out a couple things. Number one, where he or she wants the VFR cross-country flight to be planned for, say from Paducah to Springfield, Illinois, whatever, so that you plan for the correct flight. And then the second thing is you need to be sure and find out if they'll let you, do they require you to use paper maps and a log, the old-fashioned paper map and paper log is to record your waypoints and use that, or do they allow the use of an iPad for that? All of the guys that we do our check rides here still want you to do all of your planning on a paper map, which you're kind of getting harder to find sometimes. But they want you to do it all on a paper map and have a flight planner with all your named waypoints where you measure the distances and all of that. So that's a very important question you need to ask. Can I do it on an iPad, or do you want it on on paper? Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption that your DP wants you to use a good old paper map and paper flight log. So just quickly run through this real fast. Hopefully by now your flight instructor has taught you exactly how to plan a VFR flight. But what I'd like to do is go through here and show you a few features that you may not have been shown, and also discuss some of the questions that you may have to field concerning your VFR flight plan, and specifically the route on the map. So again, when you guys start, let's say we're going to do a VFR flight from this airport to this one. You're going to draw a line, with your plotter, put it on there, draw a line between the two, and then the most important thing is to highlight that line, because once you draw a line on there, there's a lot of lines on these maps, and you got to highlight it to be able to, so that you don't lose track of where your course line is. Okay, the second thing you're going to do after you've drawn your course line on the map is you want to select some waypoint selections. All right, so when you start selecting waypoints, if you're going to select a town, you want to be sure and select a town that it's at least yellow in color, like this one here. Right? If it's a yellow town, then typically it'll be at least a dozen houses, maybe 2 or 3 dozen houses, maybe much more than that, but at least it will be at least that big. You don't want to select a town like this one here, Indianola, where it just shows a little circle on the map like that. That may be 4 houses, or 5. And the problem with that is, over here's 4 or 5 houses, and over here's 4 or 5 houses, So the towns that are only indicated on the map by a little circle are very poor ones to try to select as a waypoint. So try to select your waypoints. If you're using a town, they need to be big enough to be yellow on the map. Right? Second thing you want to do, you want to try to select waypoints on things that are very easy to spot from the air. Lakes are great. Divided highways, interstates are another good option. Railroad tracks are another good option. Sometimes you might pick some of these little secondary highways, and there may be 2 or 3 other highways that are not indicated on the map, and it may be slightly confusing. So if you try to pick roads, sometimes you want to try to limit it to interstate highways or pretty much major roads, or it can be a bit confusing. Another thing you want to kind of try to avoid picking is as waypoints are towers. And the reason being is there are cell towers all over the place now. There's basically a cell tower in every direction, every 3 or 4 miles now. So they're all over the place, and some of them are a couple 100 feet tall. So if you start, if you looked at towers that are listed on your average issue sectional map, a lot of these towers are only 250 feet, 320, 255, 258. So they can be, and you got cell towers everywhere, so it can be kind of confusing. Now, if they're quite tall towers, 1,500 feet or 2,000 foot tower or something, obviously that's going to be a pretty good waypoint that you can see from a far distance, right? But picking small towers along your route that are only, 200, 300, 400 feet tall can be relatively confusing, just because the sheer number of cell towers that there are now here is getting kind of crazy. There's towers everywhere. Another thing that you might want to kind of avoid selecting is high tension wires, like here on the map, because this one's indicated on the map. I can tell you I'm familiar with this area, and there's 2 or 3 or 4 other high tension lines that sort of parallel that one, and again it can be kind of confusing, and so high tension lines are kind of a poor thing to select as a waypoint as well. Okay, so I just mentioned towers. Here's a question that may pop up when you're looking at when your DP is going over the maps with you, and it concerns. I've got a tower here that I circled, and if I'll just point with it here at the map, and so the question will come up that your DP may say, "What at the base of this tower? What is the ground elevation at the base of this tower right here?" And it's quite simple. When they list the elevation, the top number, the 1014, is MSL to the top of the tower, and the 297 is the height above the ground. All right. So you just subtract one from the other, and that gives you a height, ground height of about 717 feet would be what the ground elevation is here at the base of this tower. So if you was to point out any tower on the map and say, what's the ground elevation at the base of this tower, you should be able to easily figure that out. Sort of in the same deal, you've got the numbers that are inside of each quadrant. You've got this 1-4 here, the minimum safe height, safe altitude of the quadrant. And if you're at that height or higher, then you're not going to hit anything within that quadrant. But the question many times will come up, they want to know along a route here, someplace that you picked, and they want to know that along that specific route, they may pick a tower and say, what is the ground elevation at that point along your route? And so it's very easy to determine by subtracting the difference between the two. Okay, so you'll notice that cross-country flight planning, and then the next section that we're going to cover is airspace, and there's a lot of overlap between the two. So one of the things that you want to do is be sure that you are very well versed on all of the features that would appear on a sectional map, all right? And so here's the legend for a sectional map. And you really want to just take some time and go through each of these sections to make sure that you can recognize and then find each of these things that it shows on the sectional. Because at one point what the DPE will do is they'll just start pointing out features and saying, okay, what is this? Okay, what is this? Well, interestingly enough, there's several features that show up on a sectional map that are not on the legend. So I thought I'd show those to you here real quick. And they're commonly, they generate a question, what is this thing? One of the most kind of surprising one is railroad tracks. All right, so a railroad track. Okay, so here on your map, this like dark line here with the little tick marks going straight across it. That's a railroad track. Okay, let me show you another one. How about if he was to ask you, what is this dark green line that has the little dots in it there? Show me on the legend where that's located at. Well, number one, it's not located on the legend. And what that is the area of a game preserve or wildlife refuge, right? And so if you look right down here, it's got the dark green line and the dots there, and that's an area marking a Forest Service or wilderness area there. So that generates the next question, which is, within the wilderness area, if you're flying within that wilderness area, are there any altitude restrictions that you have to abide by? And the answer is sort of. And if you read the paragraph here above where it shows you the boundaries, what the boundaries look at, it basically says all aircraft are requested to maintain 2,000 feet above the ground within that area, but it's not required. It's only requested. So you want to fly friendly and stay at 2,000 feet above, if at all possible, but it's not required. So another question they may ask you, they could pose a question this way. Well, within that wildlife area, can I just, if I wanted to fly 500 feet above the ground, could I just bust right through there? Is that legal? And the answer is yes, it's legal. It's only requested that you stay that high. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to show you, I've only seen this appear on one sectional, and it's the Memphis sectional. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier, be sure and ask your DPE whether he'll let you use paper charts or whether he'll let you use an iPad. Well, if they let you use an iPad, guess what? That opens up a whole bunch more questions, because on that iPad you can, if you have ForeFlight on it and you're using that, then he can go all over the United States. Basically, this is a seamless sectional, and he can start posing questions about anywhere in the United States. So even though you may be in Maine or someplace doing your Checkride, he can still ask you questions about items that appear on the sectional map in far parts away from the country than what you're at. And what I'm getting at, if you look at, I'll just show you this thing here. So if you look at, this is the Memphis sectional, and this is to the west of Little Rock. And if you look here, you got all these little spickly lines here. This is the only place I've ever seen this on any sectional. So do you guys have any idea what these little spickly lines are supposed to indicate? Right? Any ideas at all? Well, I'll show you what they indicate. If you pan out a little bit and go to the side here, it says rapidly rising terrain. Right? So those little spiculated lines are basically kind of sheer cliffs where the terrain rises rapidly. Right? Well, guess what? Terrain rises rapidly in Utah and out west with the mountains, but you don't see this little spiculated design shown on any of those sectionals. However, it is shown on this one that's in Arkansas, right? So, as a great little question, they could pull up on your iPad, because they let you use the iPad, pull up the Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas sectional, and ask you, what are these little spiculated lines? And so now you know the answer to that question, right? And if I hadn't showed you that, you would have probably never known the answer to that one, because it's not on any legend, it's nowhere else to be seen. Let me show you something else that you're going to see, and they may ask you this. Here's a little uncontrolled airport here, and it's got a solid magenta line around it. All right? What's the purpose of that solid magenta line? Right? Is that an uncontrolled airport, or is that a Class D, or what is that? Yeah. So let you take a quicker look at that there. And what that is, this appears, these are seen frequently in MOAs. So an MOA, military operations area. And there's an MOA overlying this airport here, but within that circle right there, and if you look to the side, it says right here, MOA excludes the airspace 1500 AGL and below. So this is, I believe, Hog B MOA, this big MOA here. But if you're taking off from that airport right there, if you're 1,500 feet or below and within that circle, you can do touch and goes in there. And technically, you're not in the MOA. And we'll talk more about MOAs and restricted areas here in just a bit. But technically, you're not in the MOA, so they don't have to try to shut down any military operations because you want to buzz around in their MOA in a Taylor craft. And we'll talk more about that specifically here in just a bit. Okay, again, returning to the legend that's on a sectional, one of the things that you want to really be well versed on is the airport data that shows up here, and it tells you what each of these items are. You want to know that like the back of your butt. You got to know that one. All right, now let me give you a couple examples. He'll likely just pull, he or she'll likely just pick an airport and go, okay, we're here at Mount Sterling, Illinois there. And they'll just pick different items. So let's just go over what all that means first. So Mount Sterling is the name of the airport. Mount Sterling, Montgomery County. That's the identifier. You put a K in front of that, so it'd be KIOB. Right? The next section of it's the AWAS, or the automated weather and the frequency. Down on the next line here, 1019. That's the field elevation, 1,019 feet. All right. The next thing has an L, indicating that there's lighting there. And it has a little asterisk next to it, which indicates pilot controlled lighting. All right, and then 122.8 is the CTAF, or the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, that you would self-report your position if you're coming in there to land. So some of the things they'll do, they'll just point at this and go, "What's the little asterisk on the L? What does that indicate?" All right, so it's a perfect question. Right? And what that little asterisk indicates is pilot controlled lighting. All right. Why is that a big deal? Well, pilot control lighting came out, I guess about 1980 or so. You started seeing pilot control lighting showing up. And it's a way for airports to save money by being able to turn the runway lights off in the middle of the night. And so you fly in there, you have to key up on frequency. On the CTAF frequency, you key up 3, 5, or 7. And by the way, which leads me to the next question, I'll get to it in just a second. But if you're coming in and you're going to turn on the lights, you have to have a radio that works, and you click the lights up, 3 clicks, 5 clicks, 7, whatever, and you turn on the lights. All right. Why is that important? Well, when the pilot control lighting first started showing up, I made the statement that, you know, this is going to get somebody killed one day, because what's going to happen is their radio is going to fail. They're flying at night on a cross country and they only got one radio, and they won't be able to click up the lights to find the runway, and especially if somebody's running low on fuel, and somebody's going to end up running out of fuel before they locate the runway. I know they're not supposed to be that close on fuel, but it's bound to happen, right? Well, guess what? About 1 year ago, it happened. All right, Festus, Missouri. There was a guy who was actually an airlines captain, had tons of hours. Him and his son, unfortunately, were killed when they were unable to turn on the pilot control lighting at Festus, and they ended up, I think they were trying to call on a cell phone to get someone out to turn the lights on. They subsequently ended up running out of fuel and crashed within about a half mile of the airport, and were both killed, unfortunately. So pilot control lighting. So one of the questions he may ask you, okay, so you're on your way, you're going to do a night cross country, and you got pilot control lighting. What happens if your radio fails? How are you going to turn the lighting on? Well, the answer is you're not. Okay, so what you really need to have is a second handheld radio. If you don't have an aircraft that you're flying that has two radios in it, so in case one fails, you can switch to the other one and turn on the lights. Then you really need to have a handheld so that you can go on frequency and quickly click up and turn on the lights. All right, it can be the difference between life and death, literally. All right. Okay, here's the second question that I just thought of. So the second question I just thought of is, how do you know how many times to click the radio? Where are you going to look for that information at? All right, and the answer is the airport facility directory. All right, if you haven't seen, hopefully by now in your training you're aware of what an airport facility directory is. But one of the nice things about having ForeFlight, and in fact I made this statement earlier, if you have ForeFlight on your phone, you got everything you need to fly with. You can pull up the airport facility directory for any of the airports in the United States. You just pull it up, read it. It'll tell you exactly how many clicks to turn the lights up to turn on the pilot controlled lighting. So again, be sure you're well versed in the information that's contained on the airport data, because they're just, he or she's just going to start picking things out and say, what is this? Give you an idea. What are the little tick marks on this airport right here? Those little tick marks that are out. What's that indicate? Right? It indicates that there's fuel available at this airport. Or it could point at, what's the little star here above the airport? What does that star indicate? That star indicates there's a rotating beacon located at that airport. All right? So just be sure that you're real well versed on the information that's contained in the legend, and particularly on airport data, because that's a favorite question that they'll just point items out and say, what is this? And you have to explain what it is, or where to find additional information. So one of the things that you're definitely going to be asked about on VFR cross-country planning has to do with where you might stop for fuel. All right, and so a lot of times what they'll do, they'll give you in this example that I'm going to use, we're going to leave out of airport A and do a direct flight to airport B. And airport B is 300 miles away from airport A. And we're flying an aircraft that has a range of 250 miles. Okay, so here's airport A, here's airport B, 300 miles apart rather. And so I drew in several little airports along the way. You've got one at 90 miles, 130, 150, 200, and 225 miles. So if you're going to do this trip with an aircraft with a range of 250 miles, where would you stop for fuel? Which of those airports would you stop at? Okay. All right. You know that you're going to have one fuel stop. All right. The aircraft you have only has a range of 250 miles. So there's several that you could pick, but probably the brightest idea would be to stop at the one that's halfway along the course line. All right. If you do that, you're going to have the most fuel in reserve at any time on board the aircraft in case you have to deviate due to weather, that sort of thing. If you don't, you don't want to fly and you wouldn't want to pick this, well, I can make it 200 miles and I still got 50 to go. Well, if in between 150 and 200 you have to deviate due to the weather, you're starting to get low on fuel. All right. So you got one fuel stop. Try to pick roughly the airport that's halfway there, and that likely is going to be the best idea. If you stop too soon to get fuel, then you're going to be, you know, again, close on fuel by the time you get to your destination. If you try to fly too far, if you pass up a airport and end up getting low on fuel and have to deviate due to weather, then you can get yourself in trouble. So in general, you want to pick the one airport that's about halfway to your destination. Okay, so that completes part 7. We'll pick this up again in part 8, where we start more in greater detail on airspace. And again, if you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.